December 19th, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. Snowflakes hiss against the steel hull of a Sherman tank as Staff Sergeant William "Red" Thompson presses his back to the cold armor, breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. Somewhere beyond the tree line east of town, the distant crack of Mauser rifles and the guttural cough of German 88s echo through the Ardennes forest. The Battle of the Bulge has begun, though no one here calls it that yet. For the men of the 101st Airborne Division and elements of the 10th Armored, it simply feels like the world has closed in on them overnight. Just 3 days earlier, German forces launched a massive surprise offensive through the thick forests of the Ardennes, punching a deep wedge into the Allied lines. Now mechanized spearheads, Panzerfaust, Panthers and dreaded King Tigers crawl across the frozen countryside. By dawn, columns of refugees fleeing burning villages clog the roads, mixing with American convoys racing toward Bastogne. Lieutenant Colonel James Leprade of the 501st Parachute Infantry shouts from a jeep rolling past the square, "Get to your assembly areas! Move! Move!" The paratroopers, fresh from a rare few days of rest, sling M1 Garans and MG42 belts captured weeks earlier in Holland. They know almost nothing, just that something big and catastrophic is coming. Inside the town, the civilians have already begun to hide. Bastogne is a crossroads, and crossroads mean life or death. Whoever holds Bastogne controls 7 major roads that radiate out through the Ardennes like arteries. To the Germans, it's a lifeline to Antwerp. To the Americans, it's the spine of their defense. And now, everyone understands that the Germans have no intention of bypassing it. They mean to swallow it whole. By midday, the noose begins to tighten. German infantry probingly test the perimeter, firing Panzerfausts at American half-tracks near Neffer and Marvy. Snow churns under boots and tank treads. Medics drag wounded men into stone barns converted into aid stations. Chaplain Joseph Lacey, his glasses fogged by the cold, kneels beside a paratrooper whose leg is mangled by shrapnel. "Stay with me, son," he whispers as morphine takes hold. In the sky, low-hanging clouds smother Allied air support, grounding the P-47 Thunderbolts that normally sweep the roads clear of German armor. That night, around a small potbelly stove in a commandeered cafe, radio operator PFC Harold Tex Avery turns up the volume on a captured German shortwave broadcast. The voice of Lord Haw-Haw, the infamous Nazi propagandist, crackles through the room in mocking English. "To the Americans in Bastogne, your situation is hopeless. You are surrounded. No reinforcements are coming." The men glance at one another. Some chuckle, others don't. Outside, the sky pulses red as fuel dumps burn near Wiltz. Supplies are already running thin. Ammunition is rationed. Mortar crews count shells like gold coins. The worst part hasn't even arrived yet. December 21st. Temperatures plunge below freezing. The roads are now ice. The last corridor toward the west shuts as German troops seize Cibray and Vaux-les-Rosières. Bastogne is officially surrounded. Encircled, the Germans call it. Cut off, the Americans say. Major General Anthony McAuliffe, now acting commander of the 101st, studies the perimeter map illuminated by lantern inside the Hôtel de Ville. Red enemy arrows stretch inward on every side. Artillery Captain Charles O'Brien updates his report: dwindling ammo, critical medical shortages, scarce fuel. Still, McAuliffe delivers orders in his usual calm: hold firm on all fronts, no retreat. On December 22nd, white flags appear from the woods outside Bastogne, not a surrender, but a delegation. 2 German officers and 2 enlisted men approach under truce. They deliver a typed ultimatum from General von Lüttwitz of the XL7 Panzer Corps. The message is clinical, almost polite, informing the Americans that their situation is hopeless and demanding surrender within 2 hours to avoid annihilation. Outside, troops gather in small groups whispering, "Are we giving up? Is this it?" Inside the command post, the staff reads the note aloud. McAuliffe frowns, rubs his forehead and mutters, "Oh, nuts." His staff laughs. When they ask for a formal reply, he shrugs. "Write that." The German officers receive the single-word response, "Nuts," typed and handed back. They stare at it, confused. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kinnard helpfully translates, "It means, go to hell." The Germans leave without a word. But bravado does not change the reality outside. Each day the circle tightens. German loudspeakers blare taunts across the snow. "Americans, you are freezing. You are hungry. You are abandoned." Some GIs shout insults back. Others pull their coats tighter and stay silent. Frostbite ravages hands and feet. Sea rations are scarce, blankets even scarcer. Tank destroyer crews run engines just long enough to keep oil from freezing. Medics beg for plasma and bandages. The town smells of wood smoke, diesel, and blood. The Germans believe the Americans are breaking. They believe time and hunger will do the work their artillery cannot. What they do not know is that far to the south, at his headquarters in Luxembourg, a restless, hard-driving cavalryman named Lieutenant General George S. Patton is already tearing up operational plans. His Third Army, locked in combat on another axis, is about to turn 90 degrees in the dead of winter and march toward Bastogne. Patton glances over his shoulder at his staff and speaks with his usual clipped confidence. Play the ball. December 23, 1944, Luxembourg City. Inside a dimly lit headquarters building draped with blackout curtains, Lieutenant General George S. Patton paces like a caged panther. The war maps before him are a maze of arrows, symbols, and unit markers spread across a long pine conference table. Outside, staff cars idle in the freezing air. Guards stomp their boots to stay warm. Everyone inside knows Patton's reputation. Aggressive, impatient, and absolutely allergic to the idea of letting an enemy dictate the tempo of battle. Major General Manton Eddy of Truon Corps stands with gloves in hand, watching Patton's movements. "The 101st is surrounded," Eddy states quietly. "Reports say they're out of plasma and almost out of .30 caliber. Patton's jaw tightens. He's been tracking Bastogne for days, listening through static-filled radio intercepts, reading intelligence briefs, and demanding updates from Chef Command. The news grows worse by the hour. German armored divisions, 2nd Panzer, Panzer Lehr, and elements of the fearsome 26th Volksgrenadier have closed the ring around the town. Snow and fog have grounded Allied air power. Every instinct in Patton's body tells him something extraordinary is required. At 10:30 a.m., Patton storms into the main briefing room. A dozen officers from his staff rise as he enters. Among them, Major General Pinky Craig, Logistics Wizard Colonel Everett Hughes, and G3 Operations Chief Colonel Harkins. Patton taps the map with his riding crop. "Bastogne is the key," he snaps. "If the Germans take that crossroads, they split the Western Front in two." He pauses, locking eyes with each man. "We're not letting that happen." Hughes clears his throat. "Sir, our divisions are engaged along a 60-mile front. To disengage, then wheel north." Patton cuts him off. "We can pivot." Joy T Corps pulls back and shifts left. 3 Corps drives north from Arlen. Combat Command B of the 4th Armored spearheads the thrust. He draws a sweeping line on the map. L'Outremange, Bigonville, Martelange, Bastogne. Distance is 60 miles. Roads are ice. Fuel will be hell. He looks up. "But we're doing it." The room is silent for a heartbeat. Finally, Hughes asks, "When do we start?" Patton slaps the riding crop against his leg. "We already have." At 11 a.m., Patton strides into a teleconference with General Dwight D. Eisenhower at Schaeff. The Allied Supreme Commander, flanked by Generals Bradley and Smith, listens as Patton outlines his proposal to execute one of the most difficult tactical maneuvers of the war, a 90-degree shift of his entire Third Army on short notice. Eisenhower, usually cautious, raises an eyebrow. "How long until you can attack?" 48 hours, Patton answers without blinking. The room erupts. Bradley scoffs. Smith shakes his head. "Impossible," someone mutters. Eisenhower studies Patton carefully. "You're telling me you can disengage 3 divisions, pivot them north, and launch an assault in 48 hours? Patton leans forward. "I'm not telling you, Ike, I'm doing it." Eisenhower pauses, then nods. "Very well. Make the attempt." Patton leaves the conference grinning like a man who has just stolen a march on his enemy. Outside, he gathers his staff on the icy cobblestones. "Gentlemen," he announces, "the Third Army is going to Bastogne." A beat of silence, then he barks, "Play the ball." The staff disperses at a run. December 24th. Dawn breaks grey and bitterly cold. The roads are a nightmare, packed ice coated by fresh powder. Convoys inch forward through Luxembourg villages decorated for Christmas, but darkened by war. The engines of M4 Sherman tanks snarl and sputter, exhaust fumes hanging thick in the frozen air. Infantrymen of the 4th Armoured Division ride on tank decks, knuckles white from gripping the welded handrails. Each man carries extra bandoliers of 30.06, fragmentation grenades clinking under layers of wool and canvas. Private First Class Dominic Carbone of Company A, 8th Tank Battalion, writes in his journal as the column halts near Bigonville. Snow up to the thighs in places, roads jammed, hard to breathe in the cold. Nobody complains. The boys know the 101st is waiting. Combat engineers work like possessed men, laying down gravel, salt and even cinders from destroyed coal bunkers to give tanks traction. Supply trucks rumble behind with fuel jerrycans lashed to their sides. Military policemen in greatcoats stand at crossroads with flashlights, directing columns through blizzards that come and go without warning. Meanwhile, German commanders are baffled. Reconnaissance units report enemy armor on the move from unexpected directions. Colonel von Laukert of Panzerlehr studies maps in a farmhouse near Libremont, confused by Third Army's sudden presence. "Patton?" he asks incredulously. "Impossible. He was in Saarleuten yesterday." But the Third Army keeps coming. Christmas Eve, near Martelange, the leading elements of Combat Command R encounter German grenadiers supported by Part 40 anti-tank guns. The 1st Sherman takes a hit to the front glacis, sparks spraying like fireworks. Infantry hit the snow, bars chattering, while tank destroyers of the 704th TD Battalion fan out and return fire. The forest is a white labyrinth. Every tree trunk hides another rifle, another Panzerfaust. Casualties mount, but the column grinds forward, yard by yard. That same night, Patton kneels with Chaplain James O'Neill in a tiny stone chapel. Soldiers cram the pews, steam rising from wet overcoats. The chaplain reads a prayer Patton requested, one asking for good weather. The men bow their heads. Outside, artillery thuds roll across the hills like distant thunder. Back in Bastogne, the 101st still holds, but barely. The aid station in the Heinz barracks is packed, men with frozen feet, shrapnel wounds and faces pale from blood loss. The Germans shell the town relentlessly, crashing 105s and Nebelwerfer rockets into buildings already half collapsed. Yet every time enemy patrols probe the lines, they meet fierce fire from paratroopers dug into foxholes of frozen earth. The Germans taunt them with loudspeakers once more. "Christmas is coming, you will not live to see it." But from somewhere along the perimeter, no one remembers where, a soldier shouts back, "Merry Christmas to you too." Laughter ripples down the line. Morale, against all logic, holds. And then, on Christmas Day, as church bells ring weakly through smoke and snow, Patton's spearhead finally reaches within 15 miles of Bastogne's outskirts. December 25, 1944, near Assenois, Belgium. The sun never truly rises, just smears a pale grey light across the snow-choked countryside. The farm roads are rutted trenches of ice and mud, bordered by skeletal trees that look like burnt matchsticks against the sky. American artillery from the 3rd Corps booms in the distance, answering German batteries that pound Bastogne without mercy. In the middle of it all, Combat Command B of the 4th Armoured Division fights its way through the narrow bottleneck south of the town, inching closer with every engagement. Captain Jerry Mulqueen, commander of Company C, 37th Tank Battalion, stands in the turret of his Sherman Cobra King, binoculars raised. The town of Assenois lies ahead, crawling with German grenadiers supported by self-propelled guns. Mulqueen can see muzzle flashes from the tree line, 80mm mortars, MG-42s firing in tight bursts. He ducks back inside the turret and shouts, "Load AP!" The gunner rams an armor-piercing round into the breach. The tank lurches forward, engine roaring over the brittle winter silence. Behind the tanks come the infantry of the 53rd Armoured Infantry Battalion, men trudging through knee-deep drifts, rifles stiff from the cold. Sergeant Edward Langston, frozen beard flecked with snow, waves his men onward. "Keep spread out. Watch those windows." Panzerfaust teams lurk among barns and stone houses. A Sherman erupts in flame as one finds its mark. black smoke billowing, crews scrambling out onto the snow. Machine gun fire slashes over the road as the Americans return fire with Bars and Thompson's submachine guns. The clock becomes an enemy. Patton has promised a breakthrough on Christmas, and every man in CCB knows that somewhere beyond the smoke and trees, the 101st Airborne is still holding but dangerously close to collapse. Division Commander Major General Hugh Gaffey radios his units from the tactical HQ in Haby-la-Neuve. Push hard, push now, the 101st is waiting. Meanwhile, inside Bastogne itself, there is no celebration, only endurance. Snow filters through shattered roofs and into foxholes. The medics at Heinz Barracks work with bare essentials, tourniquets, sulfur powder, morphine when they have it. A medic named Private Jack Rutledge kneels beside a young trooper from Easy Company, 506th PIR, shivering uncontrollably. "Hold on, kid. Hold on," he murmurs as shells shake the walls. Outside, paratroopers scrape frozen mud from their boots and check their garans for ice, muttering about the cold, the Germans, and the fact that, of all things, they're missing Christmas dinner. German officers, convinced the encircled Americans are finished, allow themselves moments of smug confidence. Oberst Hans von Gottberg of the 26th, Volksgrenadier Division studies maps in a commandeered hotel near Cibray. "They cannot last more than a day," he remarks to his adjutant. "By tomorrow, Bastogne is ours." He taps his cigarette against an ashtray. Time favors us. But time has become Patton's weapon. At 1400 hours, CCB's armored column bursts through the outskirts of Assenois with a violent crescendo of 75 minutes of gunfire and 50 caliber machine guns. Civilians scatter for cellars as Panthers duel with Shermans at ranges so close the shells skip off frozen earth before striking armor. The Americans deploy smoke, advance house to house, and finally break the German line in the center of the town square. The remnants of a Volksgrenadier company flee into the woods, leaving weapons and wounded behind. Malquin stands in the turret once again, breath steaming, scanning the northern road. Beyond Assenois lies the final stretch, an open corridor straight to Bastogne. He keys his radio. Red Dog, this is Cobra King, we're heading in." The response crackles through the headset. "Roger, Cobra King, Godspeed." At 1645 hours, as dusk swallows the Ardennes, Cobra King leads a column of Shermans and half-tracks up the narrow Bastogne road. The snow muffles everything except the engines, steady, droning, relentless. They advance past abandoned carts, shattered fences, and the charred remains of a Kubelwagen. Then, through the haze, Malquin sees them, figures in long coats emerging from foxholes along the tree line. At first, no one moves. Then a voice shouts, "Hold your fire! It's the 4th Armored!" A cheer erupts from the paratrooper positions, raw, exhausted, disbelieving. Men slap helmets, wave rifles, and stumble forward through the snow toward the tanks. One airborne trooper climbs onto the Sherman's hull and bangs on the turret. "Merry Christmas!" he yells down the hatch. Malquin grins. "Merry damn Christmas!" Inside Bastogne, word spreads like wildfire. The corridor is open. Patton did it. Men who haven't slept in days finally exhale. Some cry openly, others sit down with their backs to a wall too tired for emotion. Colonel Kinnard remarks quietly to a staff officer, "I knew someone out there wasn't going to let us die in here." Patton receives the news in Luxembourg shortly after 1800 hours. He closes the dispatch and smirks. "Well," he says to no one in particular, "that takes care of that." But the relief of Bastogne does not end the battle. Far from it. The corridor remains narrow, exposed, and brutally contested. German armor still claws at the perimeter, and the bulge itself presses westward in other sectors. The fight for Bastogne is not over. It has merely shifted from survival to expansion. The Germans, stunned that the Americans have not only held but been relieved, now face a new reality. The momentum of their grand offensive is slipping through their fingers. December 26, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. The town that only yesterday felt like a dying island now thrums with new life, if thrumming can describe the weary movements of exhausted men hauling crates of ammo, plasma, and K-rations off half-tracks under falling snow. The corridor opened by Combat Command B is fragile, narrow, and under constant threat. but it exists, and that alone transforms Bastogne's defenders from condemned men into active participants in the campaign again. Major General Anthony McAuliffe steps out into the ruins of the Hôtel de Ville courtyard, his trademark pipe clenched in his teeth, and watches as tanks from the 4th Armoured rumble deeper into town. A Sherman grinds past, its tracks throwing ice behind it, while a line of paratroopers shuffle forward toward the improvisational chow line that has sprung up around a field kitchen. The smell of hot coffee and meat stew for the first time in days makes more than one airborne trooper blink with disbelief. But outside the perimeter, the Germans are far from finished. South of town, on the ridges near Cloquemont and Remoisville, elements of the 5th Fallschirmjäger and Panzer Lehr dig in along hedgerows and farmsteads. Their officers know they cannot allow Patton's forces to widen the relief corridor. If they fail, the offensive risks bleeding out entirely. Oberst Rudolf Gerhard of Panzer Lehr barks orders from the doorway of a ruined farmhouse. Push them back to Assenois, seal the gap. Machine gun crews set up MG-42s behind stone walls, while tank crews of the Panzer IVs sift snow over their hulls for camouflage. December 27th. At dawn, the Germans strike. Mortars bracket the road, sending clouds of dirt and ice into the air. Lieutenant Russell Graves of the 37th Tank Battalion ducks inside his Sherman as the loader shouts, "Incoming!" The tank rocks as a near miss rains shrapnel against the turret. Infantry scramble for ditches, firing back with Garans and bars. The corridor snarls into a wild melee, artillery, small arms, tank fire, all under a sky still thick with low clouds. By noon, American 150mm howitzers from the 3 Corps thunder into action from positions south of the corridor. Their shells arch overhead and slam into German firing positions on the ridge, suppressing machine gun nests and anti-tank guns. The Germans pull back grudgingly, leaving wounded and debris behind. The corridor holds. At Bastogne's aid stations, the human cost becomes painfully clear. The wounded from the 4th Armoured now join the wounded of the 101st in converted schools and basements, lit by flickering kerosene lamps. Chaplain Lacey moves from cot to cot, offering comfort. Medics stitch, splint, and amputate when necessary. The smell of ether mixes with wood smoke. One airborne medic remarks quietly, "Feels like we're stitching winter back together, one piece at a time." By December 29th, the weather finally breaks. For the first time in nearly a week, the skies over Bastogne are clear. The sound arrives first, like distant thunder. Then the shapes appear, squadrons of P-47 Thunderbolts from the 9th Air Force sweeping low over the tree line. They peel off in pairs, diving toward German positions, spitting rockets at supply columns and strafing armor caught in the open. The paratroopers cheer, waving helmets and rifles. It's not just a morale boost, it's a turning point. For the Germans, the skies have become hostile again. January 1st, 1945. The Germans attempt one last coordinated effort, Operation Bodenplatte, a massive aerial strike aimed at Allied airfields across the Low Countries. For a moment, surprise favors them. Hangars burn, aircraft are destroyed on the ground. But it is a Pyrrhic blow. The Luftwaffe loses irreplaceable pilots and planes. Air superiority, once merely contested, now tilts definitively toward the Allies. Meanwhile, on the ground, Patton's Third Army pushes west and north, prying open the bulge with methodical brutality. The 6th Armored Division reinforces the corridor, while infantry divisions like the 101st, 87th, and 35th widen the perimeter around Bastogne. German units begin to withdraw, not willingly but because their fuel trucks are empty, their logistics shattered, and the Rhine grows ever closer in their nightmares. Oberst von Gottberg watches his men retreat through Wiltz and toward Houffalize, face hardened by the bitter cold and the knowledge that the great winter gamble has failed. "We needed time," he mutters to his adjutant. "Hitler promised us time. Patton stole it." January 6th. Bastogne now serves as an Allied bastion once more. Roads are cleared, wrecks pulled aside, civilians emerge from cellars blinking at the pale winter sun. The town is a skeleton, burned walls, shattered church steeples, and blackened tanks half buried in snow, but it stands. General Patton arrives in person days later. His polished helmet gleams in the cold light as he surveys the battered crossroads. Paratroopers, unshaven and gaunt from weeks of siege, lean on rifles as he walks past. Patton slows, studies their faces, and nods once in respect. No speech, no theatrics. Just a quiet acknowledgement between soldiers who have stared down the same abyss from opposite sides of the ring. By mid-January, the bulge that once threatened to split the Allied armies in two has flattened. The front lines are pushed back toward their original positions, and the German offensive, Hitler's last great gamble in the West, dies in the snow. The siege of Bastogne ends not with fanfare, but with the simple act of holding. The Americans who endured it would remember the frostbite, the hunger, the shells, and the taunts broadcast from German loudspeakers promising death. They would also remember the sound of tank engines on Christmas Day, and the knowledge that somewhere out there, someone had refused to leave them behind. Patton's cavalry maneuver would become legend. Bastogne would become a symbol, and the German mockery would become an irony of history. For when the enemy said they were trapped, they were right. But they were trapped in a town they never intended to surrender, and that made all the difference.